Kia ora. In this explainer, we're going to unpack the Aotearoa Planning Bill. And look, this is not just some minor tweak to the rules. No, you really need to think of this as a fundamental system transplant, like a complete reboot of the operating system that builds our towns and cities.
You see, for decades, planning in New Zealand has been, well, a bit of a tangled mess, hasn't it? A totally bespoke and reactive process where pretty much every single project is a new argument. So what this bill does is propose a radical shift away from that chaotic patchwork of rules towards a single, standardized, and, crucially, predictable system for the entire country.
All right, so let's dive right in. Why a system reboot? I mean, why was such a massive change needed in the first place? Well, to really get it, we first have to understand the problem this new system is trying to solve, a problem that's been, baked into the very code of our cities for decades.
Well, here's a huge part of the answer. The old system created what some are calling a postcode lottery. And get this, we had over 1,175, that's 1,175 separate and often completely conflicting local planning zones across the country. I mean, just try to imagine the uncertainty and the delays that creates for everyone. And all that fragmentation, it led to this state of what's been called gray inertia. It's a pretty good description, actually. Think of it like this mix of bureaucratic stagnation, really inefficient infrastructure, and just unplanned sprawl. It basically stifled growth and made it painfully slow and incredibly expensive to build, anything. So this really sums up the massive scale of the change. Under the old way, the RMA, it was all built on what you could call a subjective culture of permission. Basically, every single project was a long negotiation. The new way, with this planning bill, aims for an objective culture of adherence. In other words, the rules of the game are going to be crystal clear for everyone, right from day one.
Okay, so let's look at the new guiding philosophy. Because this isn't just about changing procedures. No, the new system is actually based on a complete philosophical flip of how we think about land and, really, who it's supposed to serve.
And this is the absolute core of it. For something like 30 years, our system was built on a model where individual property rights were pretty much supreme. The new bill, it flips that on its head entirely. It establishes a new foundation where the collective public welfare becomes the absolute priority in all planning decisions.
Yeah, and this image here illustrates that new foundation perfectly. Look, individual property rights are still a pillar. They're still important. But public welfare is now that strong central column holding the whole structure up. It's the prime directive, if you like. The North Star that's meant to guide every other decision in the system. Now, this whole philosophy is heavily inspired by Japan's successful 1974 land use law. They used it to solve their own big problems with sprawl and speculation. And it's built on these four core principles. First, public welfare is the #1 consideration. Second, you preserve natural resources. Third, you protect healthy and cultural living environments. And fourth, you plan for balanced development across the country. So now we get the why behind all this. Let's look at the how. A standardized national rulebook. I mean, how do you actually turn that philosophy into a reality on the ground? Well, the answer is a new single national rulebook, and it's designed to bring that consistency and predictability to the whole country. Right at the heart of this new rulebook is a concept called the urban dam, and it's designed to do pretty much what it sounds like, manage the flow of growth, just like a real dam manages the flow of water. The key tool here is something called an urbanization control area, and it basically acts as a hard boundary, a stop valve, to halt sprawl right in its tracks. So the whole system is designed to stop that speculative, unplanned expansion out into the countryside. Instead, it channels all that investment and development into the reservoir. That's the urbanization promoting area, which is where all the infrastructure, the pipes and transit, is already planned and funded. So you protect our rural economic engines, and you concentrate growth where you can actually service it efficiently. And to make sure this all works with consistency and speed, decisions are made in this strict hierarchy. It's called the administrative funnel. The idea is the big strategic choices, things about housing and infrastructure, they get settled at the top. And this is the crucial part. They cannot be re-argued or re-litigated down at the bottom when it comes time for individual projects. Now, this is enforced by something called the Section 14 mandate. And honestly, it's a real game changer. It legally requires planners to flat out ignore all those subjective arguments that caused so many delays in the past. So things like private views from a private property, or vague notions of neighborhood character, or even the social status of who might move in, all of that is off the table. They're no longer valid reasons to object.
The only question that matters now is, does the project follow the code? Simple as that.
Okay, so we've got a new philosophy, and we've got a new rulebook. But what does all this actually mean for the shape of our towns and cities? You know, for our actual neighborhoods? How is it going to change the way we live our daily lives?
Well, the big vision here is a shift away from those car-dependent dormitory suburbs. You know the ones, where you have to jump in the car for literally everything. The goal is to move towards creating complete neighborhoods. And these are places where homes, shops, cafes, community spaces, they're all layered together. So your daily life can actually happen right outside your front door.
And here's one of the key rules it's designed to make that happen. Density follows frequency. It's a really simple, almost mathematical link. If you're building near a rapid transit line, say a train or light rail, you have to build to a minimum of 6 stories. If you're near a frequent bus route, it's a minimum of 3. It's that simple, and that ensures that growth is supported by infrastructure right from day one.
Okay, but what about protecting our economic engines? Things like ports, factories, airports. Well, for that, the bill introduces something called the newcomer principle, and it's pretty straightforward. In short, if a developer wants to build new housing right next to an existing factory, then that developer, the agent of change, has to foot 100% of the bill to mitigate any impacts, like noise.
And here's how that looks in practice. It allows for what are being called workforce habitats to be built right next to industrial areas. So new residents, they get protected with mandated solutions like acoustic glazing or better ventilation. But, and this is the crucial trade-off, in return for that protection, they basically forfeit their right to complain about the established 24/7 operations of that industry.
And finally, there's public health. And this is literally hard-coded directly into every single zone through the mandatory 330-300 rule. This isn't some nice-to-have guideline. Nope. It's a non-negotiable requirement that basically treats nature as an essential green utility for everyone, everywhere. But this monumental reform is not without its tensions. It's a really bold blueprint for sure, but it also raises some pretty big questions. It's time to talk about the great planning trade-off. You know, critics have raised some very real concerns that this new system creates a massive trade-off. And this quote here, it really captures the heart of that concern. The idea that we're proposing to replace local democracy with a centralized mathematical framework.
And that really is the core trade-off here, isn't it? The central tension of this whole reform. It's a massive balancing act. On one hand, we get national speed. We get efficiency. But on the other hand, what we're potentially losing is some of that nuance, that local voice and context that comes from democratic input.
Because at the end of the day, this new blueprint is so much more than just legislation. It's the actual code we're writing for our future society. And it's all built on this powerful truth that the spaces we build, they end up building us. So the big question this bill puts to all of us is this: what kind of future are we choosing to build for Aotearoa?